Deep in the highlands of northern Ethiopia, before dawn breaks over a city of ancient palaces and crumbling fortress walls, thousands of people are already moving through the dark streets. They're carrying something they have guarded for months, something wrapped in silk and velvet, carried on the shoulders of priests in hand-woven robes. They walk toward a pool of water that has been at the center of one of the world's most extraordinary annual gatherings for more than 3.5 centuries. And when the sun rises over the stone city of Gondar, the ceremony that unfolds will draw visitors from across the globe, shake the confidence of even the most seasoned travelers, and preserve a tradition that was nearly erased from the world entirely. This is Timkat, Ethiopia's grand celebration of Epiphany, a festival that transforms an entire region into a living theater of faith, color, music, and ancient ritual. And by the time this documentary ends, you will understand not just what happens at Timkat, but why it matters so deeply to the people who keep it alive, generation after generation. The festival takes place in the historic city of Gondar, a place that sits roughly 2,200 meters above sea level in the Ethiopian highlands. Gondar was once the capital of the Ethiopian Empire, and during the 17th and 18th centuries, it became a center of architectural innovation, royal court culture, and religious consolidation under a series of emperors who shaped the nation's identity in profound ways. The city is famous for its medieval castles, built by successive kings who constructed their palaces and fortifications in a style that blended European, Arab, and indigenous Ethiopian influences in ways found nowhere else on the African continent. But beyond the castles and the ruined royal compounds, Gondar holds another architectural treasure that sits at the very heart of the Timkat celebration. It is a complex of bathing pools and terraces built during the reign of Emperor Fasilides in the early 17th century, surrounded by pavilions and arcades that create a kind of open-air cathedral of stone and water. These pools, known simply as the Fasilides baths, become the focal point of the entire festival. On the morning of Timkat, the water in these pools is considered to have special significance, and the procession of sacred objects toward these waters is the central act of the celebration. To understand why this matters so deeply, we need to travel back in time to understand where this festival comes from and how it became what it is today. Timkat is the Amharic word for Epiphany, which itself comes from a Greek word meaning manifestation or revelation. The festival commemorates the biblical account of the baptism of Jesus Christ in the River Jordan, an event described in the New Testament as the moment when the heavens opened and the Holy Spirit descended upon Jesus in the form of a dove, and a voice from heaven declared him the Son of God. In the Western Christian tradition, Epiphany is observed on January 6th, marking the visit of the Magi to the infant Jesus and the revelation of Christ to the Gentiles. But in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, Timkat is celebrated on January 19th, following the Julian calendar, which Ethiopia still uses for religious observances. This means that while much of the world has already moved weeks past its own Epiphany celebration, Ethiopia is just arriving at its moment. The timing is not arbitrary. January falls in the dry season in the highlands, which means the weather is relatively clear, the days are comfortable for large outdoor gatherings, and the roads and pathways are passable for the elaborate processions that the festival requires. But beyond the practical considerations of climate, the timing reflects a deeper logic tied to the agricultural and liturgical calendar of the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, which has its own cycle of fasting, feasting, and holy days that stretches back to the early centuries of Christianity in the region. The historical origins of Timkat as a distinct celebration in Ethiopia are somewhat debated among scholars, but most historians agree that the festival became formalized and elaborate during the reign of Emperor Fasilides in the early to mid-17th century. Fasilides was a monarch who not only built the famous bathing complex, but also played a decisive role in consolidating Orthodox Christian identity in the empire. He brought clergy from across the region, established monasteries as centers of learning and religious authority, and created institutions that helped define what Ethiopian Christianity would look like for centuries to come. According to widely accepted historical accounts, Fasilides instituted or significantly expanded the celebration of Timkat at his royal baths, turning a liturgical observation into a major public event that blended religious devotion with royal ceremony and community gathering. The pools themselves became the symbolic River Jordan, and the rituals performed there came to embody the renewal and spiritual significance of Christ's baptism. Over time, as the empire expanded and contracted, as capitals shifted and political power moved to new cities, the celebration at Gondar remained a touchstone of identity for Orthodox communities across the highlands. Even when Ethiopia faced occupation, famine, and political upheaval in the 20th century, the festival continued, though sometimes in diminished form or under difficult conditions. Today, the Timkat celebration at Gondar's Fasilides Baths draws participants from across the country and the Ethiopian diaspora, making it one of the most significant cultural gatherings in all of Africa. The reason Timkat endures is not simply that it is old or that it is beautiful, though both of those things are true. It endures because it serves a set of deep social and cultural functions that remain relevant to the communities that participate in it. For Ethiopian Orthodox Christians, the festival represents a moment of spiritual renewal, a commemoration of the event in which Christ publicly began his ministry and was revealed to the world. In the context of the festival, the water in the baths is blessed and becomes a site of commemoration. Believers gather to remember and reflect on the meaning of Christ's baptism. Many families bring their children to be blessed or to witness the ceremony, passing the tradition from one generation to the next. But Timkat is not only a religious observance, it is also a profound expression of community identity. In a country with a rich but complex history of ethnic, linguistic, and religious diversity, the festival serves as a moment when shared heritage becomes visible on a massive scale. The streets fill with people who have traveled from villages and towns across the highlands, wearing their finest clothes, carrying the symbols of their tradition, and joining in a collective experience that transcends local boundaries. For many participants, the journey to Gondar for Timkat is not merely a visit to a festival. It is a pilgrimage, a statement of belonging, and a reaffirmation of cultural continuity. The question of who celebrates Timkat extends well beyond the boundaries of Gondar itself. The festival is observed across Ethiopia, wherever Ethiopian Orthodox communities are present, from the highlands of Tigray to the outskirts of Addis Ababa, from the lakeside towns of the Rift Valley to the eastern reaches of the country near Harar. Each community has its own variation, its own local traditions, its own particular way of marking the day. But the celebration at Gondar holds a special status, partly because of the historical associations of the site, partly because of the scale and elaboration of the rituals performed there, and partly because the Fasilides Baths provide a unique and visually stunning setting that has no parallel elsewhere. The participants include priests and deacons from monasteries and parish churches across the region who carry the tabut, which is a replica of the Ark of the Covenant, covered in ornate cloth and carried beneath a ceremonial umbrella. These tabal are the most sacred objects in the procession, and their presence transforms the street into a kind of sacred space. The priests are accompanied by singers, dancers, and drummers who create a soundscape of extraordinary richness and complexity. Beyond the religious figures, the crowds include families, children, elderly community members, young people born in cities who have only ever experienced the festival through the stories of their parents and grandparents, and in recent decades, an increasing number of international tourists who have discovered the festival through travel writing and documentary films. Local artisans and craftspeople contribute to the festival by creating the garments, ornaments, drums, and decorations that make the event so visually striking. Food vendors set up stalls along the routes leading to the baths, selling traditional dishes that have been associated with the festival for generations. The entire community becomes an active participant, and the sense of collective ownership over the event is one of its most distinctive features. The preparations for Timkat begin long before the festival itself. Weeks and sometimes months in advance, the priests and their assistants begin the meticulous process of preparing the tabot that will be carried in the procession. Each tabot is a wooden slab that represents the Ark of the Covenant, and it is kept in churches throughout the year, hidden from view, treated with the utmost reverence. For Timkat, the tabot from each church are brought out, cleaned, wrapped in layers of silk and embroidered cloth, and fitted with poles so that they can be carried on the shoulders of the priests. The preparation of these objects is itself a sacred act, and the people who handle them observe specific rituals and codes of conduct as they work. Alongside the preparation of the tabot, the communities of Gondar begin to transform the city itself. Streets that are ordinarily dusty and quiet become the sites of elaborate decoration. Banners are hung from buildings and across alleyways. Fresh flowers, particularly marigolds and chrysanthemums in bright yellows, oranges, and whites, are strung in garlands along the routes where the processions will pass. The facades of buildings are cleaned and painted where necessary. Temporary stages and seating areas are constructed near the bathing pools. Local businesses prepare for the enormous influx of visitors by stocking extra supplies, hiring additional staff, and arranging accommodations for family members coming from distant villages. Musicians begin rehearsing the traditional hymns and drum patterns that will accompany the procession. The rehearsals are often public events in themselves, filling the courtyards of churches and the squares of the city with sound and movement in the days leading up to Timkat. Volunteers organize the logistics of crowd management, the placement of security personnel, the coordination of traffic and parking, the cleanup operations that will be needed after the event. It is a massive and largely unpaid effort by thousands of people who treat it as a labor of love, a contribution to something they consider essential to their cultural identity. On the morning of Timkat itself, the city of Gondar undergoes a transformation that unfolds with extraordinary precision and organic beauty at the same time. The day begins in darkness. Well before the sun rises, the priests and their assistants begin the procession from their respective churches, carrying the tabot through the pre-dawn streets. The torches and lanterns they carry illuminate faces lined with devotion and anticipation. The sound of drums starts somewhere in the distance, a low rhythmic pulse that builds slowly as the procession grows closer. As the sky begins to lighten, revealing the silhouettes of castle towers and the outlines of the surrounding hills, the processions converge on the Fasalad's baths from multiple directions, creating a spectacle of converging streams of color and sound that draws gasps from those watching from windows and rooftops. The pools, which have been drained and cleaned in the days before the festival, are filled with fresh water that catches the first light of the morning sun. Around the pools, the priests in their hand-woven robes arrange themselves in carefully choreographed formations. The tabot, still wrapped and carried beneath ceremonial umbrellas, are brought to the edge of the water. The air fills with the sound of the special Timkat hymn, a melody that has been sung at this site and at this moment for more than 3 centuries, passed down through generations of clergy and singers. The music is haunting, layered, and hypnotic. It is performed without any kind of amplification, using only voices and traditional drums, yet it carries across the crowds with a power that seems to come from everywhere at once. The crowd, numbering in the tens of thousands on the most important days, presses together with a mix of excitement and reverence, holding children on their shoulders so they can see above the heads of the adults, shielding themselves from the warming sun with colorful umbrellas and scarves. As the ceremony progresses, the blessing of the water becomes the central act of the morning. The priests move toward the edge of the pool in a formation that has been practiced and refined over centuries. The water is blessed through prayer and ritual, and in the understanding of the participants, it becomes a symbol of renewal, of the presence of the divine in the world, and of the spiritual significance of the baptism of Christ. Families who have traveled from far away bring their children to the edge of the water or to the priests carrying the tabot, seeking blessing and participation in the collective experience. The crowds ebb and flow with a rhythm that is both organized and deeply personal, each person finding their own relationship to the moment while being swept up in the larger movement of the gathering. The costumes worn by the priests are among the most elaborate in any religious tradition in Africa. The robes are made from hand-woven cotton and silk, often in deep reds, golds, blacks, and whites, with intricate patterns that reflect the distinctive aesthetic of Ethiopian Orthodox ecclesiastical tradition. The priests wear crosses and pectoral ornaments made of brass and silver, some of them very old, passed down through families of clergy for generations. The drums used in the procession are tubular frame drums, struck with curved sticks, producing a sound that is both percussive and resonant, cutting through the air with a clarity that matches the brightness of the morning light. Around the bathing pools, the architecture of the Fasalad complex provides a visual frame for the ceremony. The stone terraces, the arched pavilions, the old eucalyptus trees that stand at the edges of the water, all of these elements create a setting that feels simultaneously ancient and immediate, like stepping into a painting that is also somehow alive. By mid-morning, the focus of the festival shifts from the religious ceremony at the pools to the broader celebration that fills the streets and squares of the surrounding city. The processions that have delivered the tabot to the baths begin the slow and elaborate journey back to their home churches, retracing the routes through the city in reverse. This return procession is often even more colorful and celebratory than the arrival, because the tension of the dawn ceremony has resolved into joy, and the daytime atmosphere brings out the full range of visual detail in the costumes, banners, and decorations. The streets are lined with spectators, many of whom have been waiting for hours to secure a place near the route. Vendors move through the crowd selling roasted barley, popcorn, and a sweet snack called kiko, which is a kind of sesame candy. Other vendors offer small crosses, rosaries, and images of saints printed on cloth, the kind of religious merchandise that appears at every major festival in Ethiopia. Food stalls serve traditional dishes that are specifically prepared for Timkat. One of the most important of these is kiko, a flatbread made from teff flour that is used to scoop up stews and relishes. Another staple is kuko, a spiced butter that is used in cooking and on bread, and which gives Ethiopian cuisine much of its distinctive flavor and aroma. The stalls are run by families and community groups who see the festival as an opportunity to share their food and their hospitality with visitors from across the country and beyond. Watching the crowd eat together, sharing plates and cups of coffee, is one of the most intimate and humanizing aspects of the festival experience. In the midst of the massive crowds and the elaborate ceremonies, there are moments of extraordinary personal connection. An elderly woman teaching a child how to hold a piece of injera correctly. A group of young men sharing a joke as they wait in line for coffee. A vendor carefully stacking ware as the afternoon heat builds around him. The music at Timkat is not incidental. It is structural. It provides the temporal framework for the entire event, organizing the flow of the procession, marking transitions between phases of the ceremony, and creating an emotional texture that holds the gathering together. The hymns are sung in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which most participants do not understand in its entirety, but which carries a weight of tradition and meaning that transcends linguistic comprehension. The drummers create complex polyrhythms that interlock with the singing in ways that are technically demanding and emotionally compelling. At certain moments, particularly during the climactic arrival at the pools, the sound becomes overwhelming, filling the stone enclosure with a wall of music that seems to come from the architecture itself. As the afternoon progresses and the heat of the sun reaches its peak, the atmosphere shifts again. People seek shade under the trees surrounding the baths, cooling themselves with bottled water and fresh oranges sold by street vendors. Small groups gather in the shadows of the castle walls, resting and talking, comparing the day to previous years, speculating about what they will do when the festival ends. Children run through the crowds playing games, their voices mixing with the distant sound of drums coming from multiple directions at once. The festival has its own rhythm, its own breath, and that rhythm changes hour by hour as the light moves across the stone and the crowds flow and regroup in patterns that feel both spontaneous and deeply familiar to those who have participated in this event many times. One of the most visually striking elements of Timkat is the presence of the umbrellas. Throughout the procession, priests and ceremonial figures carry large decorated umbrellas over the tableau, creating a canopy of color that moves through the streets like a living tapestry. These umbrellas are often made from brightly colored fabric stretched over wooden frames with patterns and symbols that reflect the iconographic tradition of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Some of the umbrellas are very old, maintained and restored by church communities over many generations, and the sight of them moving through the streets, catching the light and casting shadows on the stone buildings around them, is one of the most memorable images of the entire festival. Combined with the banners, which are often embroidered with images of saints and angels in a style that draws on centuries of Ethiopian Christian art, the umbrellas create a visual environment that feels like stepping into a different era. The colors are intense and saturated, the textures are rich and varied, and the movement of the processions creates an ever-changing composition of color and light that would be difficult to replicate in any other setting. For documentary filmmakers and photographers, the challenge of capturing this visual richness is considerable because the eye can only take in so much at once, and every angle, every moment, every frame offers a new configuration of light, fabric, and human movement. As the afternoon fades into early evening, the light in Gondar changes in ways that are impossible to describe adequately without experiencing them directly. The sun drops toward the western hills, casting long shadows across the open spaces around the baths, and turning the stone walls of the surrounding architecture a deep amber and gold. The crowds begin to thin as people make their way back to their accommodations, their homes, the houses of relatives, the guest houses and hotels that have been fully booked for months. But the festival is not over. In the evening, there is a final ceremony at the baths, a kind of closing ritual in which the tableaux are carried back to their churches in a procession that is often smaller and more intimate than the morning event, marked by a quieter energy and a sense of reflection. As the last light fades from the sky, the torches are lit again, and the procession moves through the now quiet streets, the flames reflecting in the eyes of the watching crowds, the drums providing a slow, steady heartbeat that carries the community from the peak of the celebration back into the ordinary rhythms of daily life. Families gather for meals that have been prepared for this occasion, sharing food and stories, recounting the day's events, expressing gratitude for the opportunity to participate in something that feels both deeply personal and profoundly communal. The elder members of the family tell stories about previous Timkat celebrations, about years when the rains came unexpectedly, about times when political events made the festival uncertain, about grandparents and great-grandparents who participated in the same ceremonies in the same place, carrying the same objects, singing the same songs. There are aspects of Timkat that most visitors to the festival never see or hear about, and these hidden dimensions add layers of meaning that enrich the understanding of what the event actually represents. For example, the festival is not a single day, but a multi-day observance. The day before Timkat, known as Skatera, is itself a significant occasion, marked by vigils, special prayers, and the preparation of the tabat for transport. On Skatera, the churches are filled with people who stay through the night, singing hymns and keeping watch over the sacred objects that will be carried to the baths the following morning. This night vigil is one of the most intimate and spiritually intense parts of the entire festival, and it is rarely witnessed by outsiders because it takes place inside the churches rather than in the public spaces. Another lesser-known aspect is the role of the monasteries in organizing and staffing the festival. Several of the monasteries in the highlands around Gondar maintain a special relationship with the festival, sending monks and priests who bring with them centuries-old traditions of chant and ceremony that are distinct from those practiced in the city churches. The interaction between the monastic traditions and the parish traditions creates a rich tapestry of variation and continuity that is one of the most sophisticated aspects of the festival's cultural fabric. Yet another hidden dimension is the way in which the festival has absorbed and transformed older pre-Christian traditions. Some scholars have noted that certain elements of the Timkat celebration, particularly those involving water and renewal, may reflect older agricultural and nature worship traditions that predate the arrival of Christianity in Ethiopia. Whether or not this is historically accurate, the point is that the festival is not a static artifact frozen in time. It is a living tradition that has continuously adapted, absorbed new elements, and reinvented itself in response to changing circumstances, while maintaining a core of practices and meanings that trace back through many centuries. The modern relevance of Timkat extends far beyond its religious significance. In a country that has experienced enormous economic and political challenges over the past half-century, the festival has become a symbol of resilience, cultural continuity, and national identity. For the local economy of Gondar, Timkat is one of the most important economic events of the year. Hotels, restaurants, transportation services, food vendors, craftspeople, and dozens of other businesses generate revenue during the festival that sustains them for months afterward. The influx of visitors from across Ethiopia and from abroad creates a spike in economic activity that is visible across the entire city, and local officials have come to recognize the festival as a significant driver of sustainable tourism development in the region. For the Ethiopian diaspora, Timkat has become a powerful connection to homeland. Ethiopian communities in North America, Europe, the Middle East, and elsewhere organize their own celebrations of Timkat, often modeled on the Gondar festival, using similar music, similar costumes, and similar rituals. For young people born outside Ethiopia, who may have limited direct experience of the country, participation in Timkat celebrations abroad provides a tangible link to a heritage that might otherwise feel abstract or distant. In this way, the festival functions as a kind of cultural technology, a mechanism for transmitting identity and tradition across geographic distance and generational gaps. At the same time, there are challenges. The increased visibility of Timkat has drawn larger numbers of international tourists, which has created both opportunities and tensions. Some community members are concerned about the commercialization of the festival, the presence of photographers and videographers who may not respect the spiritual significance of the ceremonies, and the potential for the event to become a spectacle for outside consumption at the expense of its authentic cultural meaning. These are real tensions, and they reflect broader debates about how living traditions navigate the pressures and opportunities of a globally connected world. The involvement of younger generations in Timkat is one of the most important and hopeful aspects of the festival's contemporary story. In the past, there were concerns that urbanization, modernization, and the pull of global culture might erode the appeal of traditional festivals among young people. While some of those concerns have proven partially valid, the reality is more complex and ultimately more encouraging than the pessimists predicted. Young people in Ethiopia today engage with Timkat in new and creative ways. They create music that blends traditional Orthodox chant with contemporary genres. They document the festival using smartphones and social media. They organize volunteer networks that support the logistics of the event, and they participate as dancers, singers, and carriers of the sacred objects, carrying on traditions they learned from their parents and grandparents while adding their own stamp to the celebration. For many young people, the festival is not a relic of the past, but a living, evolving expression of who they are and where they come from. The fact that Timkat was inscribed on the UNESCO representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity in 2018 has also had an impact on how young people relate to the festival. UNESCO recognition brings with it a global acknowledgement of the festival's significance, and for a younger generation that is acutely aware of Ethiopia's place in the world, this kind of international recognition provides a source of pride and a sense that the traditions they are part of matter beyond the boundaries of their own community. As the night deepens over Gondar and the last of the torches gutter out along the streets leading away from the baths, there is a stillness that settles over the city. The stone walls hold the warmth of the day, the pools reflect the stars, the bells of the churches fall silent until morning. The thousands of visitors who came to witness the festival begin the journey back to their homes, carrying with them a memory of something that is difficult to put into words, something that involves music and color and movement and community and history and meaning all woven together in a way that feels more like an experience than an event. Timkat is, at its core, a story about continuity and change, about the persistence of tradition in the face of modernity, about the power of collective experience to sustain identity across generations and distances. It is a story about water and light, about ritual and spontaneous joy, about ancient ceremonies performed in contemporary bodies, about a community that refuses to let go of something precious even as the world around it transforms with dizzying speed. In a time when so many of the world's cultural traditions are fading, shrinking, or becoming frozen into museum pieces, Timkat remains alive and vital, shaped by the people who participate in it, adapted to the circumstances of each new generation, and carried forward with a devotion that is as deep and as urgent as it has ever been. That is the real story of this festival, not the ceremony itself, though the ceremony is extraordinary, not the costumes and the music, though they are unforgettable. The real story is the human decision, made over and over again, year after year, to come together in a specific place at a specific time, to remember something that matters, to pass it on, and to make it real by living it. And in the morning, when the bells begin to ring again and the drums start their ancient rhythm, and the processions form once more in the pre-dawn streets of Gondar, the story begins all over again.